Introduction. Welcome, dear listener. Find a comfortable position. Perhaps you're already resting beneath warm blankets. You're breathing slow and steady. Let your shoulders soften, your jaw unclench, and allow yourself to drift gently into the quiet corridors of the past. Tonight, we'll wander beyond the tales of heroic knights and grand battles, past the heavy stone walls of mighty fortresses, to explore the overlooked, often humdrum reality of those who stood watch. The castle guards. Imagine the soft creak of your boots on worn stone steps, the distant echo of voices muffled by thick walls, the low flicker of torches casting a sleepy glow. For all the legends of siege and storm, most days within these walls unfolded in a slow, steady rhythm, and for the men tasked with guarding them, life was far more mundane than myth would have you believe. In this journey, we'll move through 4 gentle segments. First, we'll immerse ourselves in the daily routines of a typical castle guard, from chilly dawn to drowsy dusk. Next, we'll meet one real historical guard, whose life left a subtle mark on the record books. His days, his small ambitions, his place among the stones. Then, we'll wander into the quiet corners of mystery and archaeology, uncovering artifacts and hidden traces of guards long gone. And finally, we'll glance upward at the lords and ladies whose fates rested, in part, on the sleepy vigilance of these watchmen. Settle in now, breathe deeply, and let the echo of centuries wrap around you like a heavy cloak. The night is long, and the past is patient. Segment 1. Daily life. Immersion. Imagine yourself half awake, cold beneath a rough wool blanket, the Predon chill seeping into your bones. The barracks is a long, narrow room lined with simple wooden cots, each just wide enough for one tired guard to stretch out. The stone walls, centuries old, breathe out a cold dampness that no hearth can entirely chase away. There's a quiet murmur as a few men shift, coughing softly, pulling heavy cloaks tighter around their shoulders. A distant bell clangs once, then again, the signal to rise before the sun peaks over the horizon. The sound echoes through the keep, bouncing off thick walls that have heard centuries of the same call to muster. You swing your legs over the edge of your cot, bare feet brushing the cold floorboards. A pair of worn leather boots waits beside your bed, dusted with straw. The smell in the barracks is a mixture of old wool, damp stone, stale, and the faint acrid scent of oil used to keep swords and armor from rusting. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. A reminder you're not alone, even in the grey loneliness of dawn. Around you, other guards wake with practiced slowness. There's no rush, there rarely is. Castle life, for all its legends of sieges and surprise attacks, runs on routine. A guard's day starts early but unfolds at a pace set by the castle's heartbeat. Cautious, never hurried unless there is cause for alarm. You pull on your padded tunic, the fabric stiff in places where sweat and oil have seeped in over years of wear. Over it goes a simple surcoat, marked with the faded emblem of your lord's house, not the bright, fresh colors you'd find on a knight's banner, but muted, practical, easily mended. A thick belt cinches it all together, holding a sheathed dagger and the keys you'll need for locked doors and gates. Someone near the hearth has stoked the embers to life. A small pot of thin porridge bubbles over a low flame. One by one, you and your fellow guards line up, tin bowls in hand. The meal is warm, if bland. Oats, a scrap of salt, maybe a splash of ale, if last night's ration left any to spare. You eat in silence, staring into the flames or out the narrow arrow slit that offers a glimpse of the dark courtyard beyond. Once bowls are emptied and set aside, a soft scrape of boots on stone signals the muster in the outer yard. You step outside, breath steaming in the crisp morning air. The sky is beginning to pale, streaks of rose and silver against a backdrop still deep blue. Birds stir in the battlements, their calls breaking the hush. You join the line of guards before the watch captain, who stands with arms folded, eyes scanning the small gathering. He calls out assignments in a voice worn thin by years of early mornings. Who will man the main gate? Who will patrol the walls? Who will oversee the armory? Who will keep watch in the high tower? Your post today is the east parapet, exposed to the wind that sweeps in from the hills beyond the village. You nod, adjust your belt, and follow your companions across the inner yard, boots crunching over gravel. As you climb the narrow spiraling stairs to the parapet, you pause halfway to catch your breath, fingers trailing along the cool, rough stone. This is how every day begins. The same climb, the same watch, the same old stones, holding centuries of stories you may never hear. But there is comfort in the sameness. It is After all, what you signed up for. A steady post, a small wage, a roof overhead. Above you, the sun crests the horizon at last, golden light catching on banners that flutter lazily in the breeze. You take your place on the wall, leaning against the crenellations, eyes on the waking world beyond. Fields, damp with dew, the thatched roofs of the village huddled close for warmth, wisps of smoke curling from cottage chimneys. Another day begins, much like the last, and the one before that, and so you stand, watch, the weight of your padded tunic warm against the chill. The barracks behind you is now empty, the hearth embers fading as life stirs elsewhere. This is the first quiet post of many. You settle in, steady as the stones beneath your boots. Time passes slowly when your task is to watch for what almost never comes. Perched high atop the eastern parapet, you pace a short stretch of walkway, boots tapping softly on the weathered stones. The wind pushes at your shoulders and sneaks under your collar, but the padded layers do their best to hold it back. Below you, the castle stirs. Blacksmiths hammer in the courtyard, their rhythmic clang a distant heartbeat. Servants cross from hall to hall, carrying baskets of bread, buckets of water, and armloads of firewood. The stable hands lead horses to the paddock, hooves clopping against cobblestones slick with morning frost. There is a strange comfort in being above it all, looking down at the busy fortress below. Up here, your world is reduced to the sweep of your eyes. Left to right, sky to road, road to gate, gate to sky again. Always searching for a sign of danger that rarely appears. A rider bearing urgent news. A gathering of suspicious travelers at the gate, smoke on the horizon that shouldn't be there. Sometimes you hum under your breath to keep the silence at bay, or you run your fingers over the stone crenellations, tracing grooves carved by countless hands that leaned just like yours. If you stand still long enough, you imagine you can hear the voices of guards, long gone. A timeless, muttered chorus of complaints about cold winds, stiff boots, and hours that drag on like old men's tailies. Your eyes catch a movement. A farmer trudging along the muddy road below, a bent figure leading a donkey, piled high with hay. You squint, out of duty rather than worry. A single peasant is no threat to the castle walls. Still, you watch him until he disappears behind the village head. Such tiny movements break up the monotony. Each speck of life, a small gift on a long shift. You shift your weight, roll your shoulders, and glance back toward the keep. The flag above the main tower flaps in the wind, the faded crest snapping with each gust. Somewhere behind those stone walls, nobles debate taxes, alliances, or the next feast day. But up here, you are far removed from that world. Your concerns are simpler. Keep your eyes open, keep your feet warm, stay awake. Your stomach rumbles. That thin porridge never quite enough to last until midday. You nibble a crust of bread tucked in your pocket, stale but filling. A few steps in either direction, then lean back against the wall again. The rhythm is steady, the pattern unbroken. And so you pass the hours, eyes on the horizon, mind drifting like the clouds that gather and part above. You wonder, sometimes, what it would feel like to sound the alarm, to ring the great bell that would summon every guard to arms, to shut the gates against some unseen foe. But that moment never comes. The walls hold strong, the road remains empty, and the castle dreams on, quiet beneath your watchful gaze. As the morning drifts into midday, the sun creeps higher, warming the cold stones beneath your feet. The wind that once bit at your ears grows softer, replaced by the occasional rattle of leaves in the castle courtyard trees, their branches swaying gently behind the outer wall. Time passes slowly when your task is to watch for what almost never comes. Perched high atop the eastern parapet, you pace a short stretch of walkway, boots tapping softly on the weathered stones. The wind pushes at your shoulders and sneaks under your collar, but the padded layers do their best to hold it back. Below you, the castle stirs. Blacksmiths hammer in the courtyard, their rhythmic clang a distant heartbeat. Servants cross from hall to hall, carrying baskets of bread, buckets of water, and armloads of firewood. The stable hands lead horses to the paddock, hooves clopping against cobblestones slick with morning frost. There is a strange comfort in being above it all, looking down at the busy fortress below. Up here, your world is reduced to the sweep of your eyes. Left to right, sky to road, road to gate, gate to sky again. Always searching for a sign of danger that rarely appears. A rider bearing urgent news. A gathering of suspicious travelers at the gate, smoke on the horizon that shouldn't be there. Sometimes you hum under your breath to keep the silence at bay. or you run your fingers over the stone crenellations, tracing grooves carved by countless hands that leaned just like yours. If you stand still long enough, you imagine you can hear the voices of gods, long gone. A timeless, muttered chorus of complaints about cold winds, stiff boots, and hours that drag on like old men's tailies. Your eyes catch a movement. A farmer trudging along the muddy road below, a bent figure leading a donkey, piled high with hay. You squint, out of duty rather than worry. A single peasant is no threat to the castle walls. Still, you watch him until he disappears behind the village head. Such tiny movements break up the monotony. Each speck of life, a small gift on a long shift. You shift your weight, roll your shoulders, and glance back toward the keep. The flag above the main tower flaps in the wind, the faded crest snapping with each gust. Somewhere behind those stone walls, nobles debate taxes, alliances, or the next feast day. But up here, you are far removed from that world. Your concerns are simpler. Keep your eyes open, keep your feet warm, stay awake. Your stomach rumbles. That thin porridge never quite enough to last until midday. You nibble a crust of bread tucked in your pocket, stale but filling. A few steps in either direction, then lean back against the wall again. The rhythm is steady, the pattern unbroken. And so you pass the hours, eyes on the horizon, mind drifting like the clouds that gather and part above. You wonder, sometimes, what it would feel like to sound the alarm, to ring the great bell that would summon every guard to arms, to shut the gates against some unseen foe. But that moment never comes. The walls hold strong, the road remains empty, and the castle dreams on, quiet beneath your watchful gaze. As the morning drifts into midday, the sun creeps higher, warming the cold stones beneath your feet. The wind that once bit at your ears grows softer, replaced by the occasional rattle of leaves in the castle courtyard trees, their branches swaying gently behind the outer wall. A bell tolls again, a single, mellow chime, drifting on the breeze. This is the signal for the midday change of post. Another guard emerges from the spiral stairwell, his boots tapping on the steps before he appears at the top. He gives you a lazy nod. You both know the routine well enough. You stretch your back as he settles into your place, leaning on the same patch of stone you've warmed with your shoulder all morning. You descend carefully, hand sliding along the cool wall for balance. The stairwell is narrow, carved long ago, each step worn, slightly concave by centuries of feet. A torch flickers in its iron sconce, its flame fighting the drafts that sneak in through cracks in the stones. The scent of burning tallow mingles with the smell of the old walls, a musty, earthy perfume that you hardly notice anymore. Back in the yard, the keep bustles with the simple noises of midday. The ring of hammer on anvil, the rhythmic splash of buckets being filled at the well, the shuffle and chatter of servants ferrying bread, meat, and ale to the hall. You join a small knot of fellow guards near the side door to the barracks. There is an ease in these midday moments, a pause in the long watch. Someone produces a loaf of bread, dense and dark, and breaks it into rough chunks. Another pulls a wedge of hard cheese from a cloth wrap. The taste is flat, sour at the back of your tongue, but it cuts the edge of thirst and fills the hollow left by the morning porridge. Conversation drifts lazily, like the smoke that curls from the nearby kitchen chimney. The talk is simple. The weather, which always seems to be too cold or too wet. A loose shutter banging in the upper hall that needs fixing. A rumor that the Lord Steward may inspect the guardroom this week, and a scramble to sweep out the worst of the straw and crumbs before he does. Between bites of bread, you watch the life of the castle go on. A young scullery maid hurries past, head down, arms wrapped tight around a basket of laundry. A pair of stable boys wrestle a stubborn mule toward the paddock gate, their laughter carrying over the yard. High above, a flag flutters lazily, its colors dulled by sun and rain. A sparrow hops close, pecking at breadcrumbs that drop from the loaf in your hand. You toss it a larger piece, smiling at its boldness. Small distractions break up the sameness of the days. A visiting merchant, a barrel rolling free across the yard, a stray dog slipping through the gate before being chased away with half-hearted shouts. The watch captain appears from the inner keep, his broad shoulders wrapped in a cloak to ward off the lingering chill. He checks the posted roster, nods to a few men, mutters about a squeaky hinge on the postern gate that needs oiling. He is neither cruel nor kind, just practical, eyes always scanning for a guard dozing off or a latch left unlocked. When the bread is gone and the last sip of ale passed around, you stand, wiping crumbs from your tunic. There are small tasks to tend to before the next watch. sharpening a blade at the armory grindstone, oiling the iron hinges on the gate, tightening a length of rope on the drawbridge. None of it is glorious work, but it keeps your hands moving, your mind occupied. A guard's life is not the stuff of legends. No shining armor, no dragon slain. But in these small, steady tasks, you find a certain peace. The work is simple, the routine familiar. The walls rise high around you, solid and sure. And above all, you are fed, clothed, and given purpose. A quiet life wrapped in stone. As the sun begins its slow descent, the sky shifts from bright blue to pale gold, then softens into shades of rose and lavender. Shadows lengthen across the courtyard, and the guards' shapes stretch like dark brushstrokes against the walls. You gather near the armory once more, exchanging nods with men you've stood watch beside for years. Some are older than you, their beards streaked with gray. Their steps slower now as they buckle on belts and lift spears from their racks. Others are young, faces still soft with youth, eyes darting around as they adjust to the long hours of vigilance that lie ahead. The watch captain checks the roster by the glow of a lantern. He calls out the night shifts. Who will patrol the inner walls? Who will stand by the main gate? Who will keep the fire burning in the guardroom? Your name is paired with a stretch along the western wall, the side that looks out across the forest, where the tree line rustles like a sea of secrets in the wind. Before you head out, you pull on a heavier cloak, the wool scratchy against your neck, but welcome against the night air. You check the small oil lamp you'll carry, its flame dancing behind the thick glass. It will cast just enough light to see by as you make your rounds, though it leaves many corners in comfortable shadow. The castle grows quieter as darkness creeps in. Torches flare to life along the battlements, their flames licking at the dusk, throwing flickering shadows that dance over the stones. The village below settles into its evening hush, chimney smoke drifting skyward as families gather around hearths. The faint bark of a dog echoing up the slope. You climb the steps to the western Up here, the world feels even larger, more distant in the dark. You pause for a moment, leaning on the wall to look out at the black expanse of the forest. It is easy, in these hours, to imagine all manner of things lurking in that darkness. Bandits, wolves, or worse. But, the truth is simpler. The trees stand as they always have, the same wind rustling their branches, the same owls hooting softly from hidden perches. Your round takes you along the wall walk, boots scuffing the stone. Every so often you pause to check the gates below, the shadows near the towers, the flicker of another guard's lamp far down the rampart. You exchange a quiet wave with a man on the next post, your voices carrying in low murmurs that do not disturb the hush. Hours pass like this, the steady rhythm of footfalls, the soft crackle of torches, the distant hoot of an owl. The castle settles into its nighttime breathing. Slow, patient, wrapped in the drawbridge. None of it is glorious work, but it keeps your hands moving, your mind occupied. A guard's life is not the stuff of legends. No shining armor, no dragon slain. But in these small, steady tasks, you find a certain peace. The work is simple, the routine familiar. The walls rise high around you, solid and sure. And above all, you are fed, clothed, and given purpose. A quiet life wrapped in stone. As the sun begins its slow descent, the sky shifts from bright blue to pale gold, then softens into shades of rose and lavender. Shadows lengthen across the courtyard, and the guards' shapes stretch like dark brushstrokes against the walls. You gather near the armory once more, exchanging nods with men you've stood watch beside for years. Some are older than you, their beards streaked with gray. Their steps slower now as they buckle on belts and lift spears from their racks. Others are young, faces still soft with youth, eyes darting around as they adjust to the long hours of vigilance that lie ahead. The watch captain checks the roster by the glow of a lantern. He calls out the night shifts. Who will patrol the inner walls? Who will stand by the main gate? Who will keep the fire burning in the guardroom? Your name is paired with a stretch along the western wall, the side that looks out across the forest, where the tree line rustles like a sea of secrets in the wind. Before you head out, you pull on a heavier cloak, the wool scratchy against your neck, but welcome against the night air. You check the small oil lamp you'll carry, its flame dancing behind the thick glass. It will cast just enough light to see by as you make your rounds, though it leaves many corners in comfortable shadow. The castle grows quieter as darkness creeps in. Torches flare to life along the battlements, their flames licking at the dusk, throwing flickering shadows that dance over the stones. The village below settles into its evening hush, chimney smoke drifting skyward as families gather around hearths. The faint bark of a dog echoing up the slope. You climb the steps to the western Up here, the world feels even larger, more distant in the dark. You pause for a moment, leaning on the wall to look out at the black expanse of the forest. It is easy, in these hours, to imagine all manner of things lurking in that darkness. Bandits, wolves, or worse. But, the truth is simpler. The trees stand as they always have, the same wind rustling their branches, the same owls hooting softly from hidden perches. Your round takes you along the wall walk, boots scuffing the stone. Every so often you pause to check the gates below, the shadows near the towers, the flicker of another guard's lamp far down the rampart. You exchange a quiet wave with a man on the next post, your voices carrying in low murmurs that do not disturb the hush. Hours pass like this, the steady rhythm of footfalls, the soft crackle of torches, the distant hoot of an owl. The castle settles into its nighttime breathing. Slow, patient, wrapped in the safety of its walls, you fight the weight of your eyelids with a sip of cold water from your flask, the taste of iron from its rim grounding you in the present. Near midnight, you find a small nook along the wall where you can rest your back for a moment. Here, out of the wind, you close your eyes, only for a heartbeat. Just to listen. You hear the wind sighing through the arrow slits, the occasional creak of old timbers shifting, the soft clink of chainmail as another guard passes on his round. This is the life of a castle guard, so far removed from the stories told by traveling bards. No grand battles, no heroic stand at the gates, just the endless watch. The comforting sameness, the feel of stone beneath your boots, and the certainty that the dawn will come again, as it always does. Soon, the faintest glow will touch the eastern sky, the bell will toll, and you will descend the wall to the barracks once more. A brief sleep, a bowl of porridge, a new day to begin again. And in this steady cycle, this quiet, uneventful watch, lies the sleepy reality that has guarded these walls for centuries. Segment 2. A goddess biography. Imogene. A village at the edge of a lordess land, with rough thatched roofs, crooked fences, and fields that stretch like a patchwork quilt down to a silver stream. The village wakes with the sun, roosters crowing, goats bleating, as they're herded to graze. Here, a boy named Tom was born, the third son of a thatcher and his wife. Tom's early years passed like so many others in that quiet place. Bare feet in the dirt, pockets full of pebbles, a mind full of stories whispered by old men in the evenings. His brothers were stronger, more inclined to swing a scythe or carry thatching reeds on their shoulders. But Tom's eyes wandered to the distant silhouette of the castle on the hill. He'd stand on the fence posts, squinting at its towers, wondering what secrets they held. In those days, the life of a peasant boy was simple but unsteady. Crops failed more often than they The Lord's collectors came by twice a year for taxes. When food was scarce, families sent their second or third sons to the nearby town, or, if they were lucky, up to the castle in search of a place, a way to earn coin, bread, and shelter. At 12, Tom's mother kissed the crown of his head and packed a small cloth bundle, rough bread, a piece of cheese, and the good pair of stockings she'd hidden from the rest. He walked up the winding dirt path toward the castle gates, glancing back only once to see his mother's figure growing smaller with every step. At the castle, young boys like Tom were put to work first as errand runners, carrying messages from the stables to the kitchens, hauling buckets of water up countless stairs, scrubbing floors and sweeping out the rushes that blanketed the cold stone. They slept in a drafty loft above the storeroom, huddled together for warmth, sharing whispered stories of knights, heroes, and battles they'd never see. But life inside the walls offered something his village could not. Predictability. The Lord Steward was strict but fair. The cook handed out leftover heels of bread when the kitchen fires dimmed. Older guards sometimes offered a wink or a ruffle of hair, hinting that a steady hand and quiet feet might one day earn a place on the watch. By 15, Tom had grown taller, shoulders broadening from hauling sacks and barrels. He learned to oil hinges, to mend straps on shields, to carry a spear without knocking over a torch. A visiting captain from another keep once pointed him out, nodding at his calm posture in the chaos of unloading a wagon. That nod sealed his future more firmly than any grand destiny. When he turned 17, Tom joined the ranks of the junior watch. There was no grand ceremony, no polished armor. He was given a padded jack that smelled faintly of sweat and old straw, a spear with a nick near its iron tip, and a bedroll on the barracks floor. That night, as he lay awake listening to the snores and coughs of older men around him, Tom felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. His wandering had led him to a place that would shelter him, come what may. Years slipped by gently, like water over stones. Tom settled into the life of a castle guard, with a quiet contentment that surprised even himself. He found comfort in repetition. The creak of the barracks door at dawn, the sour taste of thin ale in the evenings, the soft thud of boots on stone walkways. He shared his bunk corner with a few others who became something like brothers Ulrich, who told stories of far-off cities he'd never truly seen. Bran, whose laugh echoed through the courtyard at the slightest joke, and old Joss, who had fought in a skirmish long ago and never let anyone forget it. Together, they learned how to pass the endless hours of the watch, carving tiny chess pieces from scraps of firewood, trading gossip about the castle's guests, humming low tunes that mingled with the wind on the walls. Their watch captain, Sir Marine, was a man of few words. His hair had gone white long before Tom joined the guard, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. Sir Maureen never barked commands needlessly. Instead, he expected his men to know their place, to mind their rounds, and to respect the quiet dignity of their duty. Tom admired him deeply, though they spoke little beyond the practical exchanges of each day. On fair days, when the sun rose warm and the village folk brought their wares to the castle market, Tom liked to stand just within the open gate, spear in hand. He'd watch the children chase each other between stalls, listen to the chatter of farmers haggling over apples or salted fish. Sometimes a merchantess' daughter would smile shyly at him as she passed, a small kindness that would stay with him through the long night shift. In the evenings, when the gates were bolted shut, the guards gathered near the hearth in the corner of the yard. They'd sit on overturned barrels, passing a skin of ale. They'll talk meandering through memories and heart. Tom rarely spoke of his village. It had faded into the background of his mind, like the haze that lay over the distant hills on a summer's day. Here was his world now. Stone walls, loyal companions, the comforting weight of routine. Over the years, Tom became known for his patience. If a merchant's horse balked at the gate, he'd calm it with a steady hand. If a new recruit panicked during a night patrol, Tom's calm voice would guide him back to the safe circle of the fire. These small acts of steadiness earned him the watch captain's trust. And soon Tom was trusted to check the locks on the gate, to oversee the drawbridge at dusk, to keep the younger lads honest when Sir Morin's back was turned. One spring evening, as the last traces of snow melted into the castle's stone foundations, a rumor drifted up from the village. A band of restless farmhands had quarreled with the stewardess men over a newly imposed grain tie. Whispers of anger, shouted threats, nothing more than the usual grumblings that came when times were lean. But on that particular night, after the gates were bolted and the lamps along the parapet flickered to life, Tom's peaceful rounds were interrupted by a distant clamor. He paused by the western wall, peering into the inky dark. Voices rose like distant thunder, angry, sharp, then muffled by the thick curtain of night air. Sir Maureen appeared at Tom's side, wrapped in a cloak against the chill. "Take 2 men," the captain murmured, his voice low, steady as ever. "See that the gates hold. Listen before you act." Tom did as he was told. At the main gate, he and his companions crouched behind the heavy oak doors, listening to the muffled shouts that rose from the far side. A group of villagers had gathered, demanding to see the steward, waving pitchforks more for show than for true violence. Their voices trembled with hunger more than hatred. Tom stood on the guard walk above the gate, looking down at faces lit by the flicker of torches. He could see the fear in their eyes, the way they clutched their children's shoulders. He spoke through the small opening in the gate. "Go home," he called gently. "Tomorrow the steward will hear your grievances, but tonight no one comes through." A stone clattered against the wall near his boot, a half-hearted show of rebellion. Another man, drunk on bravado, shouted something crude before being dragged away by calmer heads. Slowly, as the night deepened, the villagers dispersed. The torches flickered out. The road lay empty once more, as silent and still as it ever was. Inside the walls, Tom reported back to Sir Morin. No arrests, no blood spilled. Just another night where the stones held firm and the people-less anger cooled with the night air. It was not a battle sung by bards, nor would it ever be etched into any grand chronicle. But for Tom, it was proof that watchfulness and a calm voice could be more powerful than a drawn sword. Years turned to decades, each season weaving a soft blanket of memory over Tom's life. His hair thinned and grayed, his shoulders stooped from long hours leaning against battlements. The young lads who had once looked up to him became men in their own right. Some left for other posts. Others took wives and settled in cottages along the castle road. Sir Maureen passed on one bitter winter night, laid to rest in a small chapel crypt. Tom felt the ache of his absence more deeply than he expected, like a loose stone missing from the wall he'd leaned on for so long. But the new captain, a man half Tom's age, knew enough to keep him on, a steady elder presence, a memory of quieter times. Eventually, Tom's rounds shortened. His steps slowed. He found comfort in the warmth of the guardroom, where he would sit with a mug of weak ale, sharing tailies with the newest recruits. They'd listen with half smiles, never quite believing his stories of the time a rickety cart broke loose in the courtyard and nearly flattened the steward's horse, or how the watch once found a family of stray cats nesting in the armory. When he could no longer manage the steps to the highest parapets, he stayed near the gate, greeting travelers with a nod, exchanging a word or two with passing villagers who still remembered his patient voice. To them, he was as much a fixture of the castle as the stones themselves. Weathered, quiet, dependable. In time, Tom's name faded from rosters and rolls. He was buried in a modest plot outside the castle chapel, where the morning sun brushed the grass with gold. No grand monument marked his resting place. Just a simple stone, the carving plain. Tom, loyal guard, who kept watch when others slept. And so his story drifted into the soft hush of the past. A life of steady footsteps on old stones, of quiet words spoken through barred gates, of countless nights when nothing happened at all. In the end, his legacy was the same as the walls he served. Enduring, silent, a testament to the sleepy reality of those who guard castles long after the legends have been told. Imagine the castle long after its last guard has walked its walls. The stones stand cracked and softened by centuries of rain and frost. Ivy threads its green fingers through gaps in the mortar, and birds nest where once torches burned. The grand gates, once barred against all threats, hang crooked on rusted hinges, their wood splintered, their iron bindings flaking away like old bark. Beneath these ruins, archaeologists bend low with brushes and trowels, coaxing secrets from the cold earth. These ruins do not yield treasures of gold or jeweled crowns. What they offer instead are humbler, subtler things. The everyday ghosts of the guards who once kept their quiet watch. Picture a forgotten gatehouse, half buried under a tangle of wildflowers and bramble. The wooden doors are long rotted away, leaving only a faint impression in the earth where they once swung open and shut, day after day. The old guardroom beyond is little more than a square of sunken stone, but its dirt floor holds stories that the stones alone cannot tell. Here, a corroded key is unearthed. Small, iron, its bit worn, smooth by years of turning the same locks. Such a thing might have hung from a guard's belt, bouncing gently against his thigh with every step along the parapet. Holding it now, you can almost feel the memory of its weight, the chill of iron against coarse wool. Nearby, a simple knife blade appears under the archaeologist's careful brush, its edges chipped and dulled, but at once sliced crusts of stale bread, maybe carved a small game piece on a long night. Beside it lies a clay cup, its rim cracked, its glaze worn thin where fingers gripped it night after night. One can imagine the guard who left it behind, the warmth of ale pooling in its belly, the soft murmur of voices by the guardhouse hearth. In another corner, hidden beneath a layer of soot and ash, they find tiny iron buckles, once strapped to a guard's boots, holding thick leather tight against the winter winds. Each buckle, simple as it seems, is a testament to countless hours spent pacing stone walkways, the steady click of soles against frozen ramparts. Sometimes they find coins, not the heavy silver of nobles, but thin copper pennies, dropped through holes in old purses, lost between the flagstones. These coins speak of small indulgences, a sweet cake bought from a traveling baker, a sip of stronger ale shared in a quiet corner. They remind us that the men who guarded these gates lived not for glory, but for simple comforts, the promise of warmth and bread at day's end. Here and there, bits of cloth remain, fragile scraps of wool or linen, preserved by the cold embrace of earth. A piece of a sleeve, dyed a muted color that once matched the Lord's crest, now faded to the gray-brown of old parchment. Running your fingers over its frayed edge, you sense the scratch of rough fabric on skin, the way it itched beneath a padded jack when rain soaked the walls. Sometimes the earth yields stranger prizes, a bone handle etched with careless marks, perhaps a guard's idol carving during an uneventful watch. Tiny holes drilled along its length hint at a string once threaded through it, tied to a belt or hung on a nail near a narrow window slit. The gatehouse, silent for centuries, now hums with whispers of these small artifacts. They speak not of battles won or lost, but of a different kind of endurance. The steady patience of men who waited behind heavy doors, night after night, for threats that mostly never came. These keys, buckles, cups, and coins are their true legacy. Tokens of a sleepy reality long hidden beneath the stones. As the archaeologists pack away each find, they do so with a hush that matches the long-ago quiet of the gate. The brushes sweep the last crumbs of earth away, revealing nothing spectacular, only reminders that the lives lived here were as real as the walls they guarded. And when the sun dips behind the ruined towers, the gatehouse settles back into its dreams, secrets safe once more, waiting for another gentle hand to wake them. Beyond the gatehouses, within the narrow passages that run behind the ramparts, another kind of treasure waits, not buried in earth, but etched into the stone itself. If you stand close, a lantern held high, the walls speak in faint scratches and shallow lines, marks left by bored hands when the nights were long and the duties dull. Graffiti the guards' quiet rebellion against silence. Some of these markings are no more than initials, carved with a dull knife or the point of a spearhead. A single letter, a date, the faint outline of a shield, all pressed into the soft limestone where the damp air preserved them like fossils of thought. Near an old stairwell, an archaeologist traces a finger along a tiny sketch, a crude image of a stag, its antlers impossibly wide, its body stiff and awkward. Perhaps the guard who drew it dreamed of the forests beyond the walls, of a life freer than the stone corridors allowed. Or maybe it was simply a way to pass the time, the dull blade scratching out an image one restless night. Further along, beneath a low arch, a row of tally marks appears, 10, 20, then another cluster, crossed through at the end. What did they count? Nights on duty, days since a friend left for another post, sacks of grain received at the gate. No one will ever know for certain, but the marks remain, a soft chorus of the countless small reckonings that filled the guards' minds while the walls held their secrets. Sometimes the graffiti grows unexpectedly poetic. A single line of words in Latin or the guard's local tongue. "God keep the watch." One faint inscription pleads, the letters spaced unevenly, as though the hand that carved them hesitated in the cold. Another simply says, "I was here when the winter came." A reminder that these stone walls once shuddered under the same winds that rattle the ivy now. In the corner of a narrow passage, where the wall curves sharply around a tower, a small face stares out. Two hollow eyes, a scratch of a nose, a mouth turned slightly down. Was it the likeness of a captain, a comrade, or just the artist's own reflection in the shadows of a smoking torch? The centuries have not told, and the stone will never speak more than it does now. For archaeologists and castle keepers, these scraps of graffiti are a glimpse of the guard's humanity. Stood still, they remind us that behind every legend of watchmen who sounded alarms and manned battlements under siege, there were countless nights when nothing happened at all, when the only enemy was the creeping chill and the dull ache of feet that longed to rest. When you imagine these marks, the lines, the faces, the half-formed prayers, imagine, too, the guards who carved them. Picture the sound of blade on stone, the hush of boots shifting on cold floors, the soft sigh of breath in the dark. Picture the hush that follows when the guard lowers his knife, runs a thumb over his work, and turns back to watch the gate once more. The graffiti remains, even now, waiting for quiet footsteps and curious eyes. And in its faint scratches, the sleepy reality of castle guards lives on, not in banners or bloodied swords, but in idle doodles, whispered wishes, and marks that say only, "I was here." Beneath the thick blanket of soil that covers the old castle grounds, sometimes, the earth gives up glimmers of iron and steel, nothing like the grand swords carried by knights on horseback, but humble blades, dented spearheads, bent arrow shafts that once served quieter hands. These are the weapons of the watch, tools as much as arms, shaped not for show but for the patient. Steady duty of guarding stone walls that mostly stood unchallenged. Picture the soft scrape of an archaeologist's trowel revealing the tip of a spearhead. Its edge, dulled by centuries of rust and damp, still points true enough to remind you of the hand that once gripped its wooden shaft. A castle guard would have leaned it against his shoulder during long hours at the gate, shifting its weight from palm to palm as his eyes scanned the empty road for signs of trouble that almost never came. Sometimes the finds are more unexpected. A small iron crossbow bolt, lodged deep in the soil near an outer wall. Its tip is bent, as if it struck stone or armor. Did it fly from the castle, loosed by a guard, in a moment of rare alarm? Or did it come from beyond, shot by some restless bandit testing the fortress's patience on a moonless night? We can never know for certain. The earth keeps that secret. All that remains is the shape of a single moment of tension in an otherwise peaceful watch. Close by, half buried in what was once a guardroom floor, a simple dagger emerges, now hardened and flaking away like old bark. The blade is short, not meant for heroics, but for practicality. Cutting rope, slicing bread, or in the worst moments, protecting oneself when the walls were breached. In its quiet burial, the dagger speaks of a life where danger hovered at the edge of thought but rarely stepped into the light. Other finds lie scattered bits and pieces that would have rested in racks along the barracks walls. The iron bands of a broken shield, bossed the twisted rings of a mail coif that rusted away to nothing but a suggestion of protection. Each piece tells a fragment of the guards unspoken packed with the stones they served. To stand ready, even when readiness seemed unnecessary, year after uneventful year. Now and then, the unearthed relics hint at the small conflicts that came and went, like sudden summer storms. A short sword snapped at the hilt, found near the foot of a crumbled tower. A narrow helmet with a dent just above the brow, its thin iron folded inwards like a pressed leaf. These do not speak of great battles sung by men, but of small scuffles. A local feud that spilled onto the castle road. A night when drunken tempers flared among men who slept too close for too long. Yet for every battered blade or dented helm, there are many more that lie pristine and undisturbed in their resting places. Tools that did their duty in silence and were left behind when the last watch ended. And so the relics remind us that the true defense of these walls was not the sharpness of a spear, but the quiet discipline of the men who carried them. The slow passing of nights when the weapon stayed at rest, leaning against stone as the guards leaned beside them. Imagine the final act. A guard sets his spear in the corner before heading to the barracks for his last sleep. He never returns for it. The wood rots away, the iron sinks into the soil, and, centuries later, a gentle hand lifts it back into the light. Patient relic of the sleepy reality that outlasted every imagined siege. Beyond the iron and stone, sometimes the earth offers something more intimate. The remains of the guards themselves, in quiet graveyards just outside the castle walls, or buried within the cold ground of a ruined chapel, the bones whisper stories that words left behind cannot. Picture a small burial ground, its stones crooked and half swallowed by moss. Beneath each marker, the shape of a life comes into focus. Not grand or tragic, but woven through with the mundane threads of daily toil and watchfulness. One skeleton reveals sturdy legs, the bones thickened where muscles once wrapped them. The mark of a man who spent years pacing ramps, climbing steep stairwells, hauling crates and barrels when needed. His shoulders, slightly stooped, speak of long hours leaning on a spear or resting against a cold wall, while the wind rattled the crenellations above. A closer look shows tiny grooves in the teeth, worn smooth by a lifetime of coarse bread and rough grains that ground enamel away year by year. A chipped molar hints at pain that no healer ever fully soothed. A quiet ache endured beneath the padded jack and simple never spoken of in the guardroom chatter. Sometimes the bones tell of injuries, not glorious wounds from heroic battles, but the small, stubborn hurts of everyday life. A healed fracture along a rib, perhaps from an accidental fall while carrying a barrel up the steep inner stairs. A knuckle, fused awkwardly, the result of a brawl in the courtyard on a night when too much ale and too little patience turned brotherly banter into fists and curses. These small marks speak of men who lived close together, their lives knotted tight by routine, boredom, and the slow friction of shared walls. And what of their diet? Traces found alongside the bones, bits of charred grain, fish bones, the occasional splinter of pork, reveal meals that were plain but steady. Porridge, flat bread, a thin pottage of barley and onions, sometimes enriched by a rabbit or a fish caught in the nearby stream. On feast days, the diet bloomed briefly. Salted beef, a handful of almonds, or dried fruit, a sip more ale than usual. Small luxuries savored and remembered long after the revelry died away. The bones hold no pride in these scraps. no great boasts carved into the earth. They lie still, long after the walls have cracked and the torches gutted out. Yet, in their silence is a gentle testament. These were men who served in the soft shadows of history, steady when called, content when left alone. When the archaeologist lifts a fragment of rib or traces a hairline fracture along an ancient femur, it is not the violence of battle they find, but the quiet resilience of flesh and bone that bore up under long hours of standing watch. The weight of armor on tired shoulders, the damp chill that settled in every joint when winter winds howled through unguarded slits. In the end, these bones return to rest, covered once more by the forgiving earth. The archaeologist's notes preserve their silent stories, but the bones themselves slip back into the hush. Another layer of the castle's sleepy reality, one more soft heartbeat in the endless rhythm of stones that stand long after the last guard has laid down his watch. Segment 4. Social context and castle life. Breath in the hush of dawn as you imagine the castle not just as stone and gate, but as a living thing, its walls sheltering more than guards alone. Within these ramparts, manadams, cooks, laundresses, scribes, and stewards wove their days alongside the watchmen, each role as vital as the next in the great clockwork of feudal life. At the top of this quiet hierarchy sat the lord and lady, figures as constant to the guards as the stones themselves. A lord's presence drifted through the castle like the smoke from the great hallless hearth. He was the reason the banners hung from the towers, the reason taxes were collected, the reason the guard kept its endless watch. Yet the guards rarely saw him up close. Perhaps once or twice a month, when he walked the walls with his steward at his side, peering over battlements, asking in a voice that carried more authority than warmth, "All secure?" A nod from the watch captain would suffice. A simple gesture that everything beneath these ancient stones was as it should be. The lady of the keep moved through the castle in a softer hush, trailing embroidered hymns, and whispered conversations about grain stores and hearth fires, the health of the children, the moods of visiting nobles. Her passing brought a flicker of color into the grey routine, a splash of silk against rough wool, the sweet drift of lavender oil clinging to the air as she moved from chapel to hall. For the guards, these glimpses were reminders of a life beyond their narrow posts. Sometimes, when a guard's rounds took him near the inner courtyard, he'd pause to watch the ladies' maids airing linen in the sun, laughter like bells drifting up to the parapet. It was not envy, but a quiet sense of place, an understanding that each stone fit into the wall, each hand into its work. Between the highborn and the watchmen stood the commanders, the stewards, captains, and masters. These men shaped the guards' days more than any lord ever did. They paced the yard at dawn, rosters in hand, eyes sharp for a slouching posture or a missing spear. Their authority lay not in bloodlines, but in discipline. The steady reminder that behind every uneventful night lay the potential for a single moment of chaos. A good commander knew each guard by name, knew who limped after a hard winter, who dozed too easily on the night shift, who grumbled over sour ale, but never missed a turn on the parapet. He held the balance between harshness and quiet trust. For loyalty, like mortars, was strongest when the cracks were watched and mended in time. Thus the hierarchy held, lords and ladies at the top, commanders and stewards tending the daily hum, and the guards beneath, steady as the stones they guarded. It was not glamour, but it was order, and in that order lay the guard's peace. The comforting knowledge that his post, humble as it was, kept the whole from falling apart. When you imagine the castle guard, picture him standing beneath an arched gatehouse while the lord rides through, cloak whipping behind him, hooves clattering on the cobbles. Their eyes meet only briefly, a nod, a flicker of recognition, nothing more. Yet these small moments stitch together the relationship between highborn and humble watchmen. Most guards never sat beside their lord's hearth, never dined on sweetmeats or drank from silver goblets. Their world was coarse bread, rough ale, and a seat near the warmth of the guardroom fire. But in the hush of midnight patrols or the stir of dawn mist, they served as the unseen heartbeat of the castle's security. The quiet promise that the noble family could sleep without fear. Sometimes this relationship was marked by gestures so small they almost vanished into the grey routine. A sack of grain set aside when a hard winter thinned rations. A coin pressed into a guard's palm after a festival, enough to buy a pair of sturdier boots. An old tunic, cast off by a young squire, given to a watchman whose sleeves had frayed beyond mending. There were, of course, moments when the line blurred, when a guard's loyalty carried him closer to the noblest trust. A young captain might accompany his lord on a hunt, riding at the rear with eyes keen for trouble on the forest path. An older watchman, steady and discreet, might be called to stand inside the great hall during tense negotiations, his spear a quiet reminder that not all conflicts were settled with words, but for the most part, their worlds touched only in passing. The guard watched the high windows glow with candlelight, the sounds of feasts and dances drifting down like echoes of a life half. He stood by the gate while velvet carriages rolled out into the world, returning days later with new stories, new burdens. He did not envy the nobles their duties, the weight of alliances, debts, and rivalries that pressed on every decision. His burdens were simpler. The lock well barred, the flame well ended, the walls watched, even when no threat seemed near. In this quiet distance lay an unspoken respect. The lord knew that stones alone did not guard a castle. The guard knew that even the richest cloak could not hold back the cold if the walls were breached. And so they nodded in passing, two lives separated by status, yet bound by the same ancient walls. Beyond the lords and guards, the castle thrummed with the life of those who filled every hall and corridor with the subtle music of labor. Servants stirred to keep awake long before dawn, boots pattering across flagstones, arms burdened with baskets of firewood, loaves of bread, fresh straw for the beds. The guards knew these faces well. They exchanged quiet greetings, with the laundress hauling steaming linens up steep stairs. They held open the gate for the miller's apprentice, balancing a sack of flour on one shoulder, his hair dusted white like the first frost of winter. For a guard, these small moments broke the monotony of the watch. A passing tradesman might offer a scrap of gossip, news of a new tinker setting up near the village green, rumors of a peddler who'd been seen with coins far too fine for his humble wares. These murmurs kept the guard's mind sharp, tethering him to the life within and beyond the walls. At midday, the courtyard would fill with a gentle chaos, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the creak of wagon wheels as barrels of salted meat arrived, the chatter of stable boys wrestling with stubborn mules. Dogs barked at chickens that strayed too close to the gatehouse. Children chased each other, weaving between crates and barrels, with shrieks of delight. The soldiers, higher ranked than the watchmen, yet lower than the knights, trained in the yard when weather allowed. Their grunts and the clash of practiced swords echoed against the keep's stone flanks. The guards watched from their posts, noting new faces, the youth learning to wield a blade. While the soldiers drilled, the guards patrolled. They checked the hinges on the main gate, watched for signs of wear in the drawbridge chains, offered a nod to the scullion girl who brought them a wedge of cheese when a shift ran long. Their lives braided quietly with all who called the fortress home. In this shared routine, the fortress became more than stone and mortar. It was a hive of simple, honest toil. Each broom swept, each nail driven, each watch stood binding the walls together like mortars that never crumbled. And in the steady pace of it all, the guard found his place. Not grand, but vital, a quiet keeper of a living, breathing world. For all the sameness that shaped a guard's days, there were moments when the castle burst into color, feast days that cracked open the gray routine, like a sudden beam of sunlight through storm clouds. Picture a spring festival. Banners unfurled from the highest towers, their bright dyes snapping in a mild breeze. Minstrels tuning their lutes by the gates, the sweet smell of roasting meat wafting from the kitchen yard. For one day, the watch was doubled, for feasts brought not only laughter but crowds, and crowds brought the risk of mischief. On such days, a guard's duty changed its tone. He stood straighter by the gate as merchants streamed in, their carts loaded with barrels of ale, spiced cakes, bolts of linen, for the lord's table. He glanced sideways at jugglers and peddlers, wary of light fingers slipping through the throng. As the sun rose high, the guard on the wall glimpsed the revelry below, children dancing in circles, their voices carried up to the parapets, a sound so sweet it softened the long hours of the watch. Now and then a kind cook or passing maid would press a festival treat into a guardist hand, a honey cake, still warm, a cup of watered wine to chase off the wind's bite. At night, the castle glowed like an ember. Torches lined the courtyard, their flames dancing with the music. The lord's hall spilled laughter and song into the cold air. Some guards, trusted and off-duty, might be called inside to stand quietly in the shadows, watching over the gathering while savoring the warmth and the echo of old tales. In those rare moments, the guards glimpsed the life they protected, the bright thread of joy that justified all the nights spent in darkness and silence. And when the last song faded, and the gates clanged shut behind the final guest. The guard returned to his post, the taste of spiced wine still on his tongue, the warmth of the festival lingering in his bones. These small celebrations reminded him that his quiet watch was more than waiting for danger. It was the steady circle that kept the joy inside, the walls strong, the hearths warm. And when dawn broke over spent embers and discarded garlands, the guard, weary but content, took up his post once more, ready for the long, sleepy days ahead. Segment 5, Legacy and Gentle Reflection. You stand today at the foot of an old castle wall, stones weathered smooth by centuries of wind and rain. It is easy to forget the men who once paced above, boots tapping out a steady rhythm against the cold rampart. But in quiet ways, the guards shaped not only the fortress they served, but the life that bloomed around it. Picture the village that nestled close to the walls, its cottages huddled for shelter, roofs pitched steep against the snow, gardens planted in narrow strips that fed more than just families within. The guard's watch kept this village safe in ways that felt invisible. A locked gate at dusk, a watchful eye on a wandering stranger, a calm word that eased tension before it sparked into trouble. All small gestures that allowed the farmers to sleep, without fear of bandits, the merchants to store their goods, without dread of sudden raids. It was this trust, built brick by brick like the walls themselves, that let life thrive beyond the castle gate. On market days, the villagers knew the guards by name. A nod from the parapet, a smile from behind the lowered portcullis. Children might sneak scraps to the kennel dogs. The guards kept giggling when the animals barked in delight. Old women offered a blessing for a watchman's aching knee, a loaf of bread for the man who helped lift a stubborn goat across the frozen moat. Guards became part of the village's quiet lore, not heroes in gleaming armor, but familiar shapes in padded tunics, figures who belonged to the everyday as much as the blacksmith or the thatcher. They were the steady hands that turned away trouble before it found its way down the dusty road. And when the harvest festivals came, when bells rang in the chapel to mark the birth of a lordess heir, or the rare wedding inside the keep, the guards were there. Standing at the gate, their presence a reminder that celebration and safety are bound together by trust. In these small acts, repeated across years and generations, the guards left a legacy as enduring as any stone tower. But even the strongest walls cannot hold back the flow of time. As centuries turned, the world shifted beyond the castle's heavy gates. Gunpowder thundered across battlefields where once swords clashed and spears bristled along the parapets. Walls once thought unbreachable cracked under the force of new cannons. Their stones tumbled down to become the bones of history. Trade routes widened, kings rose and fell, villages blossomed into towns and then into cities where brick and mortar spread far beyond the shadow of any single lordess tower. The castle guard, so steady, so constant in the old world, found himself standing watch over gates that no longer barred invading knights but simply framed a courtyard where children now played. Some castles were abandoned altogether, their ramparts left to the ivy, their guard houses to the nesting birds. Others became manor houses or storehouses, their thick doors propped open to let in a soft glow of modern life. A few, lucky enough to find a place in the hearts of local people, became museums, their walls echoing with schoolchildren's footsteps, tour guides, gentle tailies, and the occasional hushed question. Did anyone ever really attack this place? In this quiet decline, the guard's legacy changed shape. No longer a living line on the parapet, his presence settled into the stones themselves. The worn steps up to the tower remember his boots. The grooves in the gate latch recall his hand, turning the key that sealed the world inside. And for every crumbled turret and weathered arrow slit, there is the memory of eyes that once watched from within, searching the horizon not for glory but for any sign of danger, danger that rarely came. And so, as the castle's purpose fell silent, the guard's story softened into legend, not a tale of fierce battles and roaring horns, but of slow, patient hours that stitched centuries together like threads pulled through old cloth. A sleepy reality that proved that sometimes peace is guarded not by walls alone, but by the simple constancy of watchful men. In time, the dusty truth of the castle guard was swept up into stories that shimmered brighter than the stones ever did. Traveling minstrels, poets, and later painters and playwrights turned sleepy sentinels into noble heroes, men who spotted enemy armies from miles away, who sounded alarms that saved entire realms, who held gates with swords drawn in dramatic final stands. And in these retellings, the long hours of dull watch, the cold toes, the whispered jokes to keep sleep at bay, These faded like mist. Who would pay a coin to hear about a guard leaning on his spear, while the wind rattled the shutters for the 1000th night in a row? Far better to imagine him standing tall under a blood-red sky, banners whipping, his voice a clarion call that summoned knights to saddle up. But when you stand beneath a real castle wall, run your fingers across the rough, ancient stone, you see the truth hidden beneath a legend's polish. The grooves where boots wore downstairs, the soot on a guardroom ceiling from countless fires that warmed cold fingers, the faint scratch of a name carved into the parapet, a guard's small way of saying, I was here, I watched, I kept you safe, even when there was no glory to win. And so both stories remain, the myth and the quiet reality, each feeding the other. The legend gives the castle its grandeur, but the sleepy truth gives it its soul. It is the guard's patient footsteps, the soft creak of a gated dawn, the muffled yawn behind a closed portcullis that truly kept these walls alive. Myths fade in the telling, but the hush of real life lingers in every stone. Now, as you lie here, breathing slow and deep, imagine the guard's watch continuing in the hush of your own quiet night. The wind might rattle your window as it once rattled. The arrow slits above a castle courtyard. A floorboard creaks a sound like a guard shifting on the battlements, adjusting his cloak against the cold. Your blanket, wrapped around you, becomes his padded tunic, a soft shield against the bite of wind and darkness. No alarm will sound tonight, no distant rider cresting the hill, no fire to be spotted on the horizon. Only the same steady hush that wrapped the guard when his eyes drooped and his thoughts drifted toward sleep. Thoughts of dawn as light spilling over the village roofs, of the small comfort of porridge in the barracks, of the certainty that walls still stand strong when the world beyond dreams on. Let your mind wander to the ruined towers, ivy trailing like lace across the stones. Picture the faint marks left by countless hands, the graffiti hidden in shadowed corners, the long crumbled keys and buckles buried deep in earth. Each one a small promise that, for centuries, someone stood between the world's quiet dreams and the dark. As you sink further into sleep, feel the echo of those watchmen in your own heartbeat. Steady, patient, unhurried. The gate is closed, the hearth glows warm, and though the guard's post has faded into history, the peace he guarded lives on within these quiet moments, waiting for you each time you close your eyes. So rest now, dear listener, wrapped in the sleepy reality of the castle guard's watch. A hush that holds you gently, as the stones once held him, all those centuries ago. Segment 6. Life Beyond the Walls. The village that slept under the guard's watch. Picture the sun just brushing the horizon, its pale light slipping over fields still damp with dew, while the castle guard stirs in the barracks, tightening the straps of his padded jack. The village beyond the outer walls wakes with its own quiet ritual, one as old and familiar as the watchman's rounds. The cottages are simple, their walls built from wattle and daub, roofs thatched with straw harvested the summer before. Chimneys puff gentle trails of smoke into the cold dawn, each wisp carrying the scent of peat or wood, sometimes the soft sweetness of bread dough rising on the hearth. In one house a farmer rubs sleep from his eyes, fingers rough from seasons spent turning the earth. He pulls on a woolen tunic patched at the elbows, worn soft by years of work. Before the first rooster crows, he's already at the barn, pushing open the creaking door to check on the animals that wait with patient breath. Cows shifting in their stalls, a sleepy hen clucking at the disturbance. Near the village green, the baker's wife kneads dough by the glow of a low fire. Her hands press and fold, each movement steady as a heartbeat. Soon the air will carry the warm, yeasty smell of rising loaves, a scent so comforting that villagers passing by the small stone oven might pause just to breathe it in. Even the guard on duty at the outer gate sometimes catches this smell on the breeze, a reminder that life beyond the walls stirs just as surely as life within. Children shuffle awake, rubbing fists against sleepy eyes, voices hushed so as not to wake the baby still bundled near the hearth. They peek out crooked windows to see if the path to the castle gate is clear, hoping to slip up to the courtyard with a basket of eggs or a bundle of herbs for the cook. The castle's high walls loom over their thatched roofs like a patient giant, not a threat, but a promise that the day will pass as it always does, watched over by men who stand between this small world and the wild lands beyond. As the sun climbs higher, a few early risers gather at the well in the village square. Old women draw up buckets, that creak and groan on their rope, exchanging murmured greetings and bits of news from the road. Sometimes, a guard passing on his patrol will pause at the edge of the green, nodding to the villagers as they go about their dawn tasks, a small sign that all is as it should be. By the time the roosters crow in earnest, the village is alive with soft sounds. The slap of laundry against a washboard, the whicker of horses in the small stables, the rattle of shutters pushed open to welcome the day. And all the while, just visible on the rise beyond the fields, the castle stands watchful and still, its walls cradling the sleepy promise that these humble cottages will greet the next dawn in peace. As the village settles into its waking hours, the rhythm quickens, not frantic, but steady, shaped by the sun's slow journey overhead. While the guards patrol the gate or lean against the cold stone of the parapet, the villagers spin out their small tasks like threads, weaving an unseen tapestry beneath the fortress's protective shadow. Stalls tilt at odd angles, draped with faded cloths that flap lazily in the breeze. A farmer's cart rattles across the green, its wheels churning up soft ruts in the dirt, its bed piled high with turnips, cabbages, or fat sacks of grain bound for the castle's pantry. The merchant's wife fusses with a scale, pinching pennies from peasants who shuffle forward, clutching a few hard-earned coins. Children chase each other between stalls, feet bare, hair tangled, laughter echoing off the old well. They dart past a guard sent down to fetch a message from the steward, the sight of his spear more exciting to them than any basket of apples or bundle of herbs. In the corner of the square, an old man sits on a barrel, weaving baskets from willow reeds he's harvested from the riverbank. His gnarled fingers work so slowly that the shape of a single basket might take half a day to appear. But he hums, as he works, a tune so old no one remembers the words. When villagers pass, they pause to listen, dropping a few copper coins into his worn cap. By midday, the air hums with the murmur of small gossip. Who's taken ill with the coughing sickness? Whose goat broke through the fence again? What rumor blew in on the road from the next village? Stories weave and unravel as easily as the old man reads. At the edge of the square stands the tavern, its timbered walls leaning slightly, as if they too are weary from centuries of village tailing. Inside, the keeper wipes tankards with a frayed cloth, his hands red from scrubbing. The tavern is no grand hall, but its smoky warmth is a bomb against the cold. Travelers stop here first when they pass through the castle's gate, exchanging news with villagers and the off-duty guards, who sometimes slip inside for a quick mug of ale before their next round. Though the guard's life is mostly stone and rampart, he knows this rhythm too. He hears it in the low voices drifting up from the village at dusk, sees it in the cluster of lanterns that flicker into life as the sun dips behind the trees. The hum of the village reminds him that his steady post means more than watching for distant threats. It means keeping this gentle pattern unbroken. As the sun sinks and the last threads of gold slip behind the hills, the village folds inward on itself like a cloak drawn tight against the cold. One by one, shutters close, door latches drop into place, and hearth fires bloom like small suns behind crooked windows. Inside each cottage, families gather close to the glow. A mother ladles thin stew into wooden bowls, steam curling into the low rafters. A father leans back against the rough wall, feet outstretched to warm toes, still stiff from the fields. Children curl up on straw pallets or rough blankets, spread near the hearth, eyelids drooping as stories tumble into the hush. In the village tavern, a final few linger over mugs of ale, voices hushed but warm. A guard finished with his rounds and lucky enough to have a few coins to spare might slip onto a bench by the fire. He sits quietly listening to old tales, half true, half embroidered over the years, of monsters in the woods of bandits, turned to stone by the Lord's justice of storms that never came, thanks to the castle's strong walls. But not every story is grim. Old men speak of guards who spotted danger before it arrived, who rang the warning bell that saved the village from marauders long ago. These are the tales that carry the goddess' presence into the villager's dream, a shape in the dark who stands between their warm beds and whatever prowls the shadowed roads. Outside, the paths are empty, but for the soft tread of boots, the patrol from the castle making its slow circle, lantern swinging, its small flame flickering in the cold night air. Sometimes, the villagers hear the low murmur of guards exchanging quiet words, boots crunching on frost-dipped earth. These sounds are not unsettling but comforting, like the low growl of a dog that warns away the wolves beyond the clearing. Safe behind their latches and shutters, the villagers drift into sleep. The castle walls rise behind them like a silent promise that dawn will come again, that the watch will hold, that the world beyond will remain at bay for one more peaceful night. When the fields were too muddy to work or the snows too deep to cross, the green villagers would gather near the hearth to spin small legends, not grand sagas of kings and conquests, but gentle tales that wrapped their humble lives in a blanket of wonder. They told of the dog who once sat by the main gate, so loyal it refused to leave its master's side even when the guard fell sick. When the man died, the dog vanished, but on nights when the wind rattled the shutters, villagers claimed they heard its distant bark, a warning that no threat could slip by unnoticed. Sometimes the stories were lighter, more hopeful. A farmer's daughter might recall how, when her father fell ill and the harvest failed, it was a guard who slipped a loaf of bread through the shutter, pretending it was the work of the Chapeau's charity, or how, on the coldest nights, the guards at the gatehouse let a stray cat sleep by the embers, its purr mingling with the soft crackle of the fire. These small legends did not feel grand histories. No bards sang them to kings, but in the village, they settled like warm straw in a winter mattress. Familiar, true enough in spirit even if no name was carved on a monument. And so, when the villagers gathered near the green, when they shared bread with the guards at the gate or offered a blessing as they passed on the road, they did so with quiet respect, not for mighty warriors on horseback or knights in shining mail, but for the watchmen who guarded their sleep with nothing more than steady eyes, a strong gait, and a heart that found contentment in the hush. Segment 7. Castle Animals. Silent companions of the night, close your eyes, and imagine the echo of footsteps on cold cobblestones. A guard pacing beneath a star-flecked sky, lantern swinging gently in his hand. Beside him, soft paws pad along the ground, claws clicking quietly on stone. A watchman's loyal dog, as constant as the man himself, eyes keen and ears pricked toward every rustle in the dark. Most castles kept a small pack of dogs, sturdy and sharp-nosed, bred not for show but for their senses, the way they could smell a stranger before the gate creaked open or bark. A warning long before an unseen visitor reached the walls. By day, the dogs lounged in the sun near the kennel, tails flicking, muzzles resting on outstretched paws. But at night, they rose, as alert as any man on the ramp. Picture a guard sitting on a low bench near the main gatehouse fire. One hand rests on the head of an old hound sprawled at his feet, its fur thick and bristly, its eyes half shut but always ready to snap open at the faintest unfamiliar sound. Now and then, the dog lifts its head to sniff the cold air, the tip of its nose twitching. It hears the squeak of a distant gate latch, the whisper of wind through the cracks, noises that, to the watchman, blur into the night's lullaby. Some dogs had tailies attached to their names, soft legends traded among the guards over mugs of thin ale. There was the hound who, when the drawbridge chain snapped in a storm, stood firm at the gap until men came with ropes and lanterns to secure the breach. Or the mangrel, who once nosed out a thief trying to slip through a hidden postern gate, his bark echoing through the keep like an alarm bell. Guards cared for their dogs as they cared for their spears, checking paws for cuts after a night patrol, slipping scraps of salted meat under the table when rations allowed. In return, the dogs offered warmth against a guard's leg on a frozen watch, a steady presence when the wind rattled shutters and the forests beyond the walls whispered secrets. When dawn came, the dogs settled into sleep as the guards filed back to the barracks. Their eyes drifted shut near the dying hearth, tails thumping once in a final wag, content in the hush they helped protect. Beyond the gatehouse, tucked near the outer wall, stood the stables. Warm breath, rising in clouds, the gentle stamp of hooves on straw, the creak of old timbers when the wind pressed against the doors. Here, horses rested between journeys, mules brayed softly in their stalls, and the stable master dozed in a hayloft above it all, one ear always open for a restless hoof. A horse's soft snort, the warm brush of its nose against the guard's outstretched hand, small signs that even the castle's great animals knew the men who stood at their gates. In winter, the stables offered a rare comfort to a guard on rounds. A brief moment to step inside, rub numb fingers over a horse's warm flank, listen to the steady rhythm of tails swishing at unseen flies. The stable master, always might push a guard toward a small bench near the coals, muttering about not letting frostbite steal a good man's toes. Stories grew around certain horses. The destrier that carried a young knight home from a distant skirmish, wounded but alive thanks to the animal's sure feet and unbroken pace, or the old pack mule that knew the path through the woods so well it could lead a small supply run even when the snow buried every marker. Guards would murmur these tales to each other on bitter nights, the horses' silhouettes shifting in the half-light as if nodding in agreement. And when dawn touched the sky with pale gold, the stable yard stirred first. Hooves clopped softly on flagstones, harnesses jingled, and the castle's heart beat into life. A guard might stand near the gate, hand on his spear, watching the lord's horse prance toward the drawbridge, muscles rippling beneath a coat brush to a dull shine. The moment passed. The hooves disappeared down the road, and the stables settled back into their soft, warm hush. Inside the keep, another kind of companion kept the guard's world free of small pests and carried a magic all their own. The castle cat slipped through the kitchen door at dusk, and you'd see a tabby slinking past barrels of grain, nose twitching at the faintest scurry of tiny claws behind the sacks. To the guard on late rounds, these cats were like shadows with tails, weaving through torchlight in the corridors, perching on windowsills in the guardroom to blink slow-eyed at the men drowsing by the embers. It was said in whispers that cats carried secrets between the walls, slipping through cracks and hidden passages even the oldest stewards didn't know. A watchman resting his back against a cold stone wall might feel a small, warm weight press against his hip. A cat curling into the crook of his cloak for an hour of shared warmth. Many a night shift was brightened by the soft rumble of the gentle need of tiny paws working the guard's tunic into a makeshift bed. When the wind howled through the arrow slits, when a guard's mind drifted into half-dreams of home, and the flick of a cat's tail against his boots reminded him that he was never entirely alone. Some guards swore the cat sensed danger, that they'd vanish into the shadows when something was amiss, reappearing only when calm returned. True or not, the men kept scraps of salted fish hidden in their pockets, a quiet bargain struck for good luck and quiet company. No ledger recorded the cats' names, no bard sang of their deeds, but in the hush of the keep, they were as much a part of the castle as the thick oak doors or the echo of boots on stone. And when dawn's light spilled across the barracks, the cats slipped back to their hidden nooks, their work done until the next watch. Above the stables and guardrooms, beyond the reach of boots and spears, another world perched, the realm of the castle birds. On the highest towers, ravens croaked in the morning mist, doves fluttered in and out of arrow slits, and small sparrows gathered crumbs dropped by passing boots. To the castle guard leaning against the parapet, these birds were quiet company through the endless hours. He watched them peck at lichen on the stones, their feathers puffed up against the wind that never stopped whispering along the battlements. Sometimes, the beating wings were the only motion for miles, a reminder that life hummed on, even when the road below lay empty and the forest stood still. Ravens, sharp-eyed and watchful, earned a place in the guard's tailies. Some believed they were omens. A single raven circling the tower meant a visitor would come by dusk. 2 ravens perched on the same wall meant news from afar. Such stories filled the empty hours, weaving a thread of wonder through the monotony of the watch. Doves brought gentler signs, cooing softly from hidden nests tucked into cracks near the chapel roof. When the guard passed below, he sometimes caught a drift of feathers falling like snow, a hush within a hush. He might pause to watch a fledgling test its wing, its uncertain flight echoing his own thoughts, drifting far beyond the walls. At dawn, the birds rose with the sun. A guard standing at his post would hear the low murmur of wings before he saw the first glow on the horizon. The flocker's soft chatter wrapped around him like a cloak, a promise that the night had passed, the walls had held, and the sleepy cycle would begin anew. And so, from the hound curled by the gate to the sparrow flitting through arrow slits, the castle's animals wove themselves into the guard's steady life. They asked for little but gave much. Warmth, warning, a hush that kept the darkness from pressing too close. Even now, centuries later, when ruins stand empty and walls crumble to moss and ivy, you can almost imagine The ghost of a paw print, the whisper of feathers, the echo of a dog, slow bark in the mist, silent companions of the night watch, guarding the hush until dawn. Segment 8. Seasons of the God. How time passed in castle wrapped in winter's hush, thick walls rimmed with frost, battlements dusted in drifting snow, the distant village roofs huddled under white like sheep, asleep in a field. For the castle guard, winter was the true test of patience, where the enemy was not always a lurking stranger but the cold itself, creeping through stone and bone alike. A guard rose before dawn, breath clouding in the dark barracks as he tugged on woolen hose and padded tunic stiff with last night's chill. The corridor beyond the door was colder still. Torches flickered low, the flames burning bright but giving little warmth to the watchman climbing the icy stair to his post. Up on the parapet, the wind cut through every layer, slipping under collars, numbing fingers that gripped spear shafts or lantern handles. A guard might stamp his boots to stir warmth back into frozen toes, his breath leaving pale trails that drifted toward the stars. Sometimes, when the clouds cleared, the night sky stretched like black glass, pricked with 1,000 sharp points of light. The hush seemed deeper then, as if the world had stopped moving altogether, frozen under the guard's steady gaze. In the gatehouse, the brazier glowed low, its red coals coaxed back to life by a watchman's gloved hands. Dogs lay cold near the embers, muzzles twitching in their dreams, paws flicking now and then as they chased unseen quarry through snowdrifts of memory. A mug of thin ale, warmed by the fire, tasted better in these hours, the steam curling up to touch a guard's cold nose, the sip sending tiny waves of heat down into his chest. When dawn came in winter, it came slowly, a pale blue wash along the edges of the sky, the sun shy behind a wall of drifting clouds. The guard watched from his high post as the village below struggled awake. Doors cracked open just wide enough for someone to toss feed to the animals. Smoke rising in thin lines from cottage chimneys, each whisper promised that life endured even under the weight of snow. Sometimes, in those bitter months, the guard would glance at the ramparts where snow piled against the stone, wondering if spring would ever return. But he kept his watch. Boots, the hooves, disappeared down the road, and the stables settled back into their soft, warm hush. Inside the keep, another kind of companion, kept the guard's world free of small pests and carried a magic all their own. The castle cat slipped through the kitchen door at dusk, and you'd see a tabby slinking past barrels of grain, nose twitching at the faintest scurry of tiny claws behind the sacks. To the guard on late rounds, these cats were like shadows with tails, weaving through torchlight in the corridors, perching on windowsills in the guardroom to blink slow-eyed at the men drowsing by the embers. It was said in whispers that cats carried secrets between the walls, slipping through cracks and hidden passages even the oldest stewards didn't know. A watchman resting his back against a cold stone wall might feel a small, warm weight press against his hip. A cat curling into the crook of his cloak for an hour of shared warmth. Many a night shift was brightened by the soft rumble of the gentle need of tiny paws working the guard's tunic into a makeshift bed. When the wind howled through the arrow slits, when a guard's mind drifted into half-dreams of home, and the flick of a cat's tail against his boots reminded him that he was never entirely alone. Some guards swore the cat sensed danger, that they'd vanish into the shadows when something was amiss, reappearing only when calm returned. True or not, the men kept scraps of salted fish hidden in their pockets, a quiet bargain struck for good luck and quiet company. No ledger recorded the cats' names, no bard sang of their deeds, but in the hush of the keep, they were as much a part of the castle as the thick oak doors or the echo of boots on stone. And when dawn's light spilled across the barracks, the cats slipped back to their hidden nooks, their work done until the next watch. Above the stables and guardrooms, beyond the reach of boots and spears, another world perched, the realm of the castle birds. On the highest towers, ravens croaked in the morning mist, doves fluttered in and out of arrow slits, and small sparrows gathered crumbs dropped by passing boots. To the castle guard leaning against the parapet, these birds were quiet company through the endless hours. He watched them peck at lichen on the stones, their feathers puffed up against the wind that never stopped whispering along the battlements. Sometimes, the beating wings were the only motion for miles, a reminder that life hummed on, even when the road below lay empty and the forest stood still. Ravens, sharp-eyed and watchful, earned a place in the guard's tailies. Some believed they were omens. A single raven circling the tower meant a visitor would come by dusk. Two ravens perched on the same wall meant news from afar. Such stories filled the empty hours, weaving a thread of wonder through the monotony of the watch. Doves brought gentler signs, cooing softly from hidden nests tucked into cracks near the chapel roof. When the guard passed below, he sometimes caught a drift of feathers falling like snow, a hush within a hush. He might pause to watch a fledgling test its wing. It's uncertain. Flight echoing his own thoughts, drifting far beyond the walls. At dawn, the birds rose with the sun. A guard standing at his post would hear the low murmur of wings before he saw the first glow on the horizon. The flocker's soft chatter wrapped around him like a cloak, a promise that the night had passed, the walls had held, and the sleepy cycle would begin anew. And so, from the hound curled by the gate to the sparrow flitting through arrow slits, the castle's animals wove themselves into the guard's steady life. They asked for little, but gave much. Warmth, warning, a hush that kept the darkness from pressing too close. Even now, centuries later, when ruins stand empty and walls crumble to moss and ivy, you can almost imagine the ghost of a paw print, the whisper of feathers, the echo of a dog, slow bark in the mist, silent companions of the night watch, guarding the hush until dawn. Segment 8. Seasons of the Guard. How time passed in castle wrapped in winter's hush, thick walls rimmed with frost, battlements dusted in drifting snow, the distant village roofs huddled under white like sheep, asleep in a field. For the castle guard, winter was the true test of patience, where the enemy was not always a lurking stranger, but the cold itself, creeping through stone and bone alike. A guard rose before dawn, breath clouding in the dark barracks as he tugged on woolen hose and padded tunic stiff with last night's chill. The corridor beyond the door was colder still. Torches flickered low, the flames burning bright but giving little warmth to the watchman climbing the icy stair to his post. Up on the parapet, the wind cut through every layer, slipping under collars, numbing fingers that gripped spear shafts or lantern handles. A guard might stamp his boots to stir warmth back into frozen toes, his breath leaving pale trails that drifted toward the stars. Sometimes, when the clouds cleared, the night sky stretched like black glass, pricked with 1,000 sharp points of light. The hush seemed deeper then, as if the world had stopped moving altogether, frozen under the guard's steady gaze. In the gatehouse, the brazier glowed low, its red coals coaxed back to life by a watchman's gloved hands. Dogs lay cold near the embers, muzzles twitching in their dreams, paws flicking now and then as they chased unseen quarry through snowdrifts of memory. A mug of thin ale, warmed by the fire, tasted better in these hours, the steam curling up to touch a guard's cold nose, the sip sending tiny waves of heat down into his chest. When dawn came in winter, it came slowly, a pale blue wash along the edges of the sky, the sun shy behind a wall of drifting clouds. The guard watched from his high post as the village below struggled awake. Doors cracked open just wide enough for someone to toss feed to the animals. Smoke rising in thin lines from cottage chimneys, each whisper promised that life endured even under the weight of snow. Sometimes, in those bitter months, the guard would glance at the ramparts where snow piled against the stone, wondering if spring would ever return. But he kept his watch, boots crunching softly on the frost-hardened walkway, each step a quiet promise that the warmth would come again, that the castle's heart would beat through the longest, coldest night. Then, almost without warning, the deep freeze yielded to spring's gentle push. The castle walls, once stiff with frost, wept tiny rivers as the sun coaxed snow into clear rivulets that dripped down stone and pooled in the muddy yard. The guard, who had wrapped his cloak tight all winter, now felt the warmth slip into his bones like an old friend returning from far away. Boots that once left crisp prints in the snow now squelched in puddles of melt. Wooden doors, swollen by months of damp, creaked open wider, letting in the smell of thawed earth rich, almost sweet, with the promise of green shoots soon to push through the brown. In the village below, the thaw meant more than dry feet. It signaled the coming of small festivals that scattered petals over the watchman's daily rounds. Children ran barefoot again, trailing garlands plucked from hedge. A guard on patrol near the outer gate might nod to a cluster of villagers weaving wreaths to hang on the chapel door, symbols to keep bad luck from slipping through the cracks the frost had left behind. Inside the castle, the guard's duties turned lighter in spirit, if not in effort. Broken latches, warped by winter's breath, had to be fixed. The drawbridge chains were checked for rust, winches greased. so they'd turn smoothly in the spring rains. Small leaks that dripped down the stairwells in January now demanded buckets and careful repairs. With the first proper warm days, the guard might find himself posted near the market wagons rolling through the gate, wheels caked in the last traces of winter mud. He exchanged soft words with merchants who smelled of wet earth and fresh-cut herbs, their faces pink from the sun's return. And when evening fell, the watch felt different. The cold no longer a dagger at his throat, but a gentle breath that carried the smell of damp grass and distant fires. The guard, leaning on the rampart, would hear frogs singing near the moat, the echo of laughter drifting up from the village and where farmers raised cups to the first good thaw. He knew, as all men on the walls did, that hardship would come again. But for now, spring unlatched the world, letting warmth and color slip through the gates, and the watchman, standing above it all, felt hope rise in him, like sap stirring in the branches of a tree that had weathered one more winter. When summer settled over the castle, it wrapped the walls in a haze of warmth, and the guard's watch changed its flavor again. The cold stones had bit at fingers in winter now radiated heat, so that leaning against the rampart left a patch of warmth pressed through the padded jack. Below the battlements, the road baked dry under the sun. Dust rose in slow spirals behind carts rattling toward the market square, wheels squeaking in protest. The gate stood open longer, the portcullis lifted high, while villagers came and went, with baskets of fresh peas, straw hats shading their faces from the glare. For the guards, this meant more eyes on the road, more hands checking papers and inspecting wagons for smuggled wine, or the odd sharp blade tucked under a pile of hay. The watch was busier, but the danger felt distant. Heat was the true adversary. A man could drift off, leaning on his spear when the sun struck just so, only to wake with a start as his captain's boots scraped the stones nearby. In the courtyard, animals shifted restlessly, horses stamping flies from their flanks, dogs panting in the shade of the gatehouse. A guard on duty near the stables might steal a sip of cool water from the trough, wiping sweat from his brow as the blacksmith's hammer rang out, each strike a sharp, metallic heartbeat echoing in the noon air. Yet summer was not all slow days and lazy warmth. When storms rolled in, they did so with a roar, winds howling through the arrow slits, rain pounding the wooden shutters so hard the sound rose like a drumbeat against the guard's ears. He'd tug his cloak tighter, checking the gate latches twice, listening to thunder echo beyond the forest's black line. Sometimes, lightning lit the road in ghostly white, the village roofs gleaming wet and the castle walls glistening like polished bone. A guard posted high on the tower would watch the storms dance in silence, a tiny figure holding a flickering lantern against nature's wild display. When the storms passed, the air softened once more, the road steamed in the rising sun, and the guard, boots damp and cloak still smelling of rain, leaned back against the parapet. Another night survived, another dawn blooming pink beyond the hills. And then the days shortened, the sun slipped lower in the sky each evening, its warmth fading hour by hour as the castle shifted into autumn's hush. For the guard, this was the season of preparation, of making the walls ready for another winter, of sealing up the cracks the summer heat had widened. In the village, fields turned golden brown, the smell of ripe grain mixing with wood smoke, as families stoked hearth fires against the growing chill. Wagons rolled through the castle gates, piled high with sacks of barley and bundles of firewood, stores to be salted, stacked, and kept dry in deep storerooms below the keep. The guards oversaw these deliveries with a watchful eye, counting barrels and checking locks on granary doors. They watched the bustle with a patient calm, knowing that each stack of hay, each row of salted meat, each sealed barrel was a promise that no man or beast inside the walls would go hungry when the snows came. Along the parapets, repairs began in earnest. Mortar was pressed into cracks where the wind liked to whistle through, loose stones tamped tight with the steady thud of a mason's mallet. The guard might stand beside these men, lending a hand to haul buckets of sand or hold a lantern steady when dusk arrived too early. Inside the gatehouse, cloaks were inspected for holes, boots checked for split soles that could betray a guard's feet to the winter's bite. Dogs were brushed thick and healthy, their coats ready to share warmth on a frozen night. The guard's mind turned inward too. 2 small comforts tucked away, a thicker pair of socks from the quartermaster, an extra blanket folded at the foot of his bunk. When the last harvest festival flickered out, when the villagers turned homeward with cheeks flushed from bonfires and mugs of cider, the guard leaned on his spear at the gate and listened to the quiet return. He watched the stars blink to life above the courtyard, felt the first true bite of frost slip under his collar, and knew the cycle had come round once more. Yet there was no dread in this knowing. The guard's life was built on these circles, dawn to dusk, sun to snow, watch to watch. In this endless turning, he found a calm that no battle could grant, a hush deeper than any legend's roar. And so the castle settled under its first soft blanket of frost, stones dreaming of spring, even as they braced for winter's claim. The guard, posted high on the walls, drew his cloak tighter and kept his steady watch, in season, in the patient passage of time. Segment 9. Tools of the guard. Simple gear, hidden guard leaning on his spear, its shaft smooth, where years of palms have polished the wood to a dull sheen, more than any sword or gleaming piece of armor. The spear was a castle guard's true companion. Sturdy, practical, always at hand when the watch grew long, and the road below blurred into the hush of dawn. The spear's design was simple, a length of ash or oak, strong enough to bear the weight of an iron tip, yet light enough for a man to hold for hours without his arm trembling. A good spear balanced like an extension of the guard's body, its worn wood resting azely against the crook of his shoulder as he paced the parapet under. Imagine a guard's hands roughened by cold winds, nicked by chores in the yard, wrapped tight around the shaft when a shape moved beyond the torch's reach. Those same hands might sand down splinters on a quiet afternoon, rubbing a bit of oil into the wood so that it would not crack when winter espite sank deep into every fiber. Though not grand like a knight's sword, the spear carried its own soft stories. A faint notch near the iron tip, left when it struck a stone during a scuffle at the gate, a length of leather wrap near the middle, where a split once threatened to weaken the whole. Some guards tied small tokens to their spears, a scrap of cloth from a wife's sleeve, a ribbon picked up at a fair, a charm woven from horsehair and whispered prayers. When the guard stood watch at dusk, the spear's shadow stretched long along the walkway, a second figure keeping company as the sun dipped low. In storm or snow, the spear leaned beside the guard like an old friend, its weight a reminder that duty was not always a shout and clash of steel, but often just the patient balance of wood against a weary palm. And when the shift ended, the spear rested in a simple rack near the guardroom fire, its point wiped clean, its shaft set gently, among others. A small forest of sleepy sentinels waiting for another night, another hand to take up their silent promise. Beyond the spear, the guard's simplest armor against the restless wind was his cloak, a length of wool thick and scratchy, a blessing when cold slipped through the stones and rattled the arrow slits like a ghost trying to slip inside. Picture him shrugging it over his shoulders before stepping out onto the wall, the rough fabric settling heavily across his back. The cloak's dye, once the deep blue or muted green of the Lord's house, had faded over years of sun and rain to a dull grey-brown, yet it still held warmth like a hearth against the ribs. Under the cloak, the guard wore his tunic, padded in places to soften the weight of a breastplate, should a skirmish demand more than a calm word and a locked gate. The tunic smelled of the barracks, old wool, faint sweat, a hint of the lye soap used to sparingly on wash day, but it was familiar, like the guard's own skin, wrapping him in the comfort of countless nights, stood in the hush of moonlight. In the deepest winter, he might tuck scraps of fur along the collar, patch the elbows with bits of leather scavenged from a tanner's cast. Small stitches here and there told stories of rips caught on rusty nails or a sharp stone that snagged cloth as he leaned too far over the wall to spot a distant shape on the road. Sometimes, when the watch grew especially low, a guard might wrap the cloak tight around his shoulders and pull it up over his chin, nose buried in wool to warm the air before it filled his lungs. Beneath that cloak, he could imagine himself hidden from the creeping frost, a small island of warmth beneath the vast cold sky. And in those quiet hours, the cloak became more than just fabric. It was a soft barrier against the world's edge, a reminder that, though the stones could not move to shelter him, he carried his own fortress wrapped around his shoulders, stitched and worn but faithful to the last dawn bell. On moonless nights, when mist crawled along the battlements and the road dissolved into shadow, the guard's lantern burned like a promise, a small flickering flame cupped behind horn panes or thick glass its glow, barely strong enough to chase back the dark, but enough to show the next careful step. A guard would light it at the barracks hearth, lowering the flame into the oil or tallow reservoir, adjusting the wick until the light glowed steady. He'd check the frame for cracks, the handle for splinters that could cut a cold palm. Then, lantern swinging at his side, he'd climb the stone steps to the parapet, its soft circle of light bouncing gently against the ancient walls. In that tiny glow, the world shrank to what the guard could see. A length of walkway, the outline of a tower door, the shape of his boots shuffling through drifted leaves or fresh snow. Beyond the light, darkness pressed in, thick with the hush of sleeping fields and distant woods. Beside the lantern, tucked near the guard's belt, hung the watch bell, not always rung, but ready. Its shape was simple, a small bronze mouth that, when struck, called life back to the fortress in an instant. A single clear note could stir the barracks, summon the captain, turn sleep into steel, and orders barked through echoing halls. Yet on most nights, the bell stayed quiet. Its silence was its own kind of comfort. Proof that the flame in the lantern was all the guard needed to hold the night at bay. He'd listen to it flicker in the cold air, the soft hiss of the wick almost a lullaby when the road remained empty and the gates stayed barred. When the dawn came, he'd lower the lantern back to the guardroom hearth, snuffing the wick with a small pinch of damp cloth. The bell would hang by the door again, its mouth still and waiting, and the guard, weary but grateful for another night of calm, would know he had kept the darkness where it belonged. Outside the soft circle of his watch, perhaps no tool felt more ordinary, yet carried more weight, than the ring of iron keys that clinked softly against a guard's belt. As he moved through the castle, S-belly in the hush of night, they were not grand things, just lengths of iron, forged by the blacksmith whose hammer rang out in the courtyard by day. Each key had its own shape, long shanks, crooked wards, teeth filed to fit ancient locks that had kept secrets safe for more generations than any guard could count. Picture the feel of them in the palm. Cold at first, then warm from the guard's touch as he slid one free from the ring. He'd slip it into the lock of a gatehouse door, its heavy bolt clicking aside with a low, satisfying scrape. Or he'd bend to a small chest in the armory, its hinges squealing as they gave way to the touch of a key turned true. Some keys opened gates so large that a single push of the wooden door required the strength of 2 men to swing wide. Others turned in locks so tiny they seemed suited for a child's toy chest, a hidden drawer, a secret cupboard behind the steward's desk. Each one, though simple in its own way, marked a piece of the fortress held together not by stone alone but by trust. The keys carried a weight beyond iron. They were the guard's bond to those who slept under his watch. Farmers in the village who never saw the barred gates at midnight, nobles in their feather-stuffed beds, servants drowsing by dying hearth fires. A turn of a key kept them safe from whatever might knock at the walls. When a guard passed the ring to his relief at dawn, it clinked like a soft bell, a lullaby of metal teeth clicking together. The new watchman would tuck it against his belt, fingers brushing each key as if counting blessings, and the circle would begin again. In these small things, spears, cloaks, lanterns, bells, keys, the sleepy reality of the castle guard found its quiet heartbeat, not in grand battles or roaring horns, but in the simple trust that when the world grew dark, the gates stayed closed and the flames stayed lit. Or because a watchman carried his tools and kept his steady post. Segment 10. Songs, superstitions, and small ritual symmetry in the hush of midnight on the wall walk. The guard leaning into the wind, his cloak tugging at his shoulders, the stars wheeling overhead. In the long hours when the road remained empty and the torches burned low, a man's mind drifted easily into memory and scraps of old tunes. No grand anthems rang out from the battlements. Instead, there were murmured chants, half whispered to chase away the creeping frost, or lullabies learned from mothers long gone. The guard's voice rose and fell like the flame in his lantern. Low, steady. Sometimes it was a harvest song, lines about wheat standing tall under the sun, or a playful tavern tune about a girl with wild hair and a smile like spilled ale. The words blurred over years of retelling, patched together with new rhymes made up on the spot to keep loneliness at bay. Now and then, 2 guards passing each other on the parapet would trade verses like coin. One man's hum would drift into the next guard's breath, a soft call and response, weaving through the hush, a reminder that even when each man stood alone, their watch was shared. Some songs were prayers in disguise, words strung together to keep misfortune outside the walls, saying keep my eyes sharp, saying keep my feet warm, saying keep my tongue still when shadows pass. These lines, passed from old mouths to young, gave the darkness less room to grow, and when the dawn bell clanged far below, the guard might let the final notes slip from his lips into the soft blue of morning. No one ever wrote them down, but in that fleeting melody, the sleepy heartbeat of the watch lived on, the hush beneath the hush. When a guard climbed his post, it was not always steel and stone that gave him courage. Tucked in a pocket or tied around his neck, he carried tiny tokens, small talismans that whispered promises of luck and protection in a world that could turn on a single slip of fate. Picture a smooth river pebble, pale gray, worn to a perfect oval by the guard's thumb. He found it as a boy, slipped it into his pouch, before he left his village for the fortress gates. Now, years later, its surface is polished by countless watchers, spent rubbing its comforting curve while his eyes scanned the sleeping fields. Or a scrap of ribbon, bright once, now frayed and dulled by time. Perhaps it came from a sweetheart's hair, tied around the guard's spear shaft before she waved him off to his first mustering. When the wind howled, he'd tug it loose and twist it between his fingers, a silken link back to warmth and candlelight far from the ramparts. Some carried tiny carved figures, saints with faces worn smooth by damp wool and constant touch. A small wooden cross, strung on a cord beneath the tunic, brushed the guard's collarbone with each step. A simple bead of bone, drilled through and hung from a leather thong, rattled softly whenever he bent to check the gate locks. These charms were never part of the official inventory, but no captain turned them away. Even the strictest commander knew that a lucky token weighed nothing in a man's pack, yet lightened his fears on the blackest nights. Better a guard stand steady with a scrap of ribbon in his palm than quake at shadows without it. Long after the gates closed and the stones grew cold, these tokens remain, unearthed by chance, centuries later. A bead here, a scrap of cloth, there echoes of the guard's quiet hope that luck would keep watch alongside him. Beyond their tools and their charms, guards spun small rituals into their watch. Gestures so ordinary that they faded into the stone itself, yet carried a secret power that turned fear into familiarity. Before stepping through the gatehouse door, a guard might tap the lintel 3 times with the haft of his spear, not loud enough to wake the sleeping yard, but firm enough to tell whatever ill luck lingered that it would go no further. Tap, tap, tap. A promise pressed into wood, a barrier stronger than any iron lock. Some whispered a blessing over the keys before they turned the heavy bolt, a line learned from a mother's bedtime prayers, or words so old they made no sense but carried comfort all the same. Lock hold, night hold, trouble stay out where it's cold. The words warmed the key in his palm before the iron teeth met the waiting slot. On certain nights, the first frost, the longest night, the turning of the year, a guard might slip a sprig of rosemary into the doorframe or leave a bit of bread on the windowsill. For the small spirits who watched the castle when mortal eyes drooped shut, the crumbs vanished by dawn, whether by mouse or magic, and so the ritual was kept alive. A pair of guards crossing paths on their rounds might trade a soft tap on each other's shoulder, not a greeting but a safeguard. You see me? We hold the hush together. No order demanded it, no book recorded it. Yet, without these small touches of trust, the walls would have felt colder than any winter wind. So the rituals lingered, woven through the guard's breath and boots and buttons. No matter how still the night grew, they lit small lamps inside the mind, steady as the flame in the watchbell's circle of light. At the end of every shift, when boots shuffled down the spiral stairs and the barracks door creaked open to welcome tired shoulders and heavy eyes to guard, a swatch closed with one final ritual, a farewell to the hush he'd kept through the passing dark. Some spoke it under their breath as they laid spear and lantern back in their places. Walls stand, gates hold, hearths warm, sleep deep. For simple wishes, stitched together like a blanket to wrap around the castle until another watchman took his place. Others paused by the gatehouse door, pressing a palm flat against the ancient wood, feeling its splinters, the small scars left by centuries of hands just like theirs. This touch asked nothing from the door, yet gave everything, a promise that the next guard would find the latch still strong, the lock still true. The oldest guards, whose hair grayed beneath battered helms, said nothing at all. They simply sat by the dying fire in the guardroom, boots unlaced, eyes softening as they stared at the embers. The hush they'd guarded seeped back into their bones, a lullaby for weary limbs. No farewell needed. The hush knew them too well to forget. And so the circle closed, night after night, watch after watch. Small songs hummed on the wall, tiny charms tucked into warm pockets, gestures drawn in the air where no enemy could see. These were the sleepy threads that tied guard to guard, dawn to dusk, heart to stone. When your own eyes grow heavy, imagine that farewell drifting through your thoughts. Walls stand, gates hold, hearths warm, sleep deep. The hush holds you, as it once held the men who leaned on spears and lanterns, waiting for the world to dream again in peace. Segment 11. Echoes in the Ruins. The castle guard remember Edicture, an old castle now, long abandoned, its towers slouched under moss and ivy, its gatehouse door leaning from a single rusted hinge. No banners snap in the breeze, no watch bell clangs in the courtyard. Yet if you listen closely, the stones remember. A visitor's boots crunch softly over the gravel path once kept clear by generations of watchful eyes. Each step presses into shallow grooves worn smooth by guards who paced these walls for centuries, boots scuffing the same flagstones, day after day, round after round. The stairwell that twists up to the parapet is narrow and damp, its steps cupped like old palms. Each hollow dip in a stone is a record, 1,000 feet climbing up with lanterns swinging, keys clinking at the belt, eyes blinking against the cold night wind. The guard who trudged those steps on a moonless night left behind more than footprints. He left a hush that seeps into the walls, a memory of slow breathing, steady hearts, and watchful eyes. Lean close to a battlement and ULLC marks that a hurried glance might miss. Scratches from spear tips, leaned against the parapet a faint groove where a hand rested for balance during a sudden gust of winter wind. A patch of lichen climbs over a small patch where a name was once carved. The goddess way of saying I was here when words were scarce and hours stretched thin, when rain drifts through the broken roof and runs down the old walls. It finds every crack and channel the guards once traced with absent fingers. The stones drink in the hush, then breathe it out again in the soft drip of water into shallow pools that mirror the clouds above. So though the guards have long vanished, though their cloaks turned to dust and their spears rusted into the earth, the stones remember every sought footfall and patient breath. They hold the hush like a secret, waiting for each new visitor who stands still enough to feel it beneath their boots. Slip through the crooked arch of the gatehouse, and you'll find corners the wind has claimed. Guardrooms half swallowed by creeping vines, hearths choked with moss where dogs once curled and guards warmed cold hands between rounds. A beam of sunlight slants through a gap in the roof, catching motes of dust that drift like faint echoes of all the nights. When this same air carried the low murmur of voices, the gentle click of boots on stone. Now, instead of boots, weeds push up through the cracks. Stubborn green reminders that life always finds a way to fill the hush left behind. In one shadowed corner, you might find a rusted hook still wedged into the wall. A place where a lantern hung to cast its flicker across tired faces, or a small ring of iron driven into the stone where dogs were once tethered, their soft growls echoing against the thick walls. While the guard leaned nearby, spear resting within easy reach. Near the window slit that overlooks the road, ivy threads through broken mortar, wrapping the sill where once a guard perched to watch for riders on the distant hill. Even the arrow loops, now half clogged with wind-blown leaves, still cradle the hush. A pocket of quiet that never quite lets go of the memory of eyes scanning the dusk. Sometimes a traveler stepping inside might swear they feel the warmth of old embers in the cold hearth. A shift of the breeze, or perhaps the hush itself, pressed into the stones by centuries of patient watch. There's no need to chase the mystery too far. The ruiner's gentle silence is enough, a reminder that even empty rooms can hold the shape of a man, as quiet care. When the ruin's gates creak open now, it is not for armored horses or the clatter of supply wagons, but for quiet footsteps, the careful tread of travelers who come to touch the hush for themselves. Children run along the broken wall, walk, laughter spilling like startled birds into the hush that has held its breath for centuries. They don't see the guard's shadow behind them, but the stones do. They remember the shape of boots where small sneakers now skip and slide. An old man stands at the edge of the tower, hand resting on the damp, lichen-clad parapet. He closes his eyes for a moment and breathes in the hush that clings to these stones. Maybe he hears an echo. The scrape of a spear, the faint scratch of a guard humming a song into the wind. Or maybe it's just the sigh of the breeze through empty arrow slits, weaving past ivy leaves that flutter like faded banners. A young woman kneels in the gatehouse, tracing a carved mark almost hidden by time. A faint cross, a letter, a small spiral. She snaps a photograph to carry the hush home with her. Later she'll remember the way the ruins smelled of damp earth, and old stories, how the cold stone under her fingertips felt somehow warm with the memory of a hand long vanished. Sometimes the local village folk come too, moving quietly along the paths their ancestors once trod. They pause by the chapel ruin, its roof long gone, but its walls still cradling prayers. They stand where the barracks once echoed with snores and soft laughter. where the guard laid down his watch for a few hours of dreamless sleep. Each visitor leaves a new layer of hush behind, the hush of wonder, of small footsteps, of hearts that beat a little slower when they stand in the ruins. And in this quiet mingling of past and present, the guard's watch lives on, not in swords and shields, but in the soft echo of breath and boots that come to listen. In the end, the guard's story slips away from stone and spear, lantern and key. It lingers instead in the quiet places we carry inside ourselves, the hush that settles when the world grows still, when our shoulders drop and our thoughts drift like lantern light across an empty road. When you stand alone in your own dark room at night, perhaps you feel it too. That small sense of safety pressed into the walls by countless watchmen, who leaned into wind and snow so others could sleep. The hush, is the same hush they guarded, a promise stitched from steady footsteps, soft songs, lucky charms, and the gentle touch of a hand on an iron key. Even now, when ruin and road have swallowed the last visible trace of the guard's round, you can find him in your own quiet breath, the slow rise and fall that says the gate is closed, the hearth is warm, the night will pass, the walls will hold. So rest now, dear listener, wrapped in this hush that outlived every horn and battle cry. When you close your eyes, picture a single figure leaning on his spear, lantern flickering at his side, cloak pulled tight against the wind. His boots scuff the old stones. He hums a tune too soft to hear, and when you drift into sleep, he stays. Patient, steady, a heartbeat pressed into the world's endless hush. The guard's watch endures, so sleep deep, and let the walls stand. Final thoughts in the end. This whole story is a soft reminder that history isn't always made by kings, crowns, or great battles. Sometimes it's shaped day by day by ordinary men standing guard in the dark. Boots, scuffing old stones, hands wrapped around a spear worn, smoothed by patient palms, eyes drifting across empty roads, not for glory, but for the simple promise that others could rest without fear. These guards with their lanterns, lucky charms, soft-hummed tunes, and whispered prayers, left behind no grand monuments or epic songs. Instead, they left a hush, pressed gently into the walls, the gate hinges, the cracked flagstones. A hush so steady that even centuries later, when ivy claws at the towers and the battlements crumble into moss and earth, you can still feel it if you stand very still. And that's the gift this sleepy history offers, the knowing that real safety is not always loud. That trust is not built by horn blasts and banners, but by countless small moments. A key turned true, a cloak pulled tighter, a round walked again and again, long after the danger has faded from memory. In telling their story, you Haven T just described what once was. You've given your listeners permission to drift into that hush, to rest where once thousands slept peacefully, never knowing the guard's cold feet, his aching knees, his lantern's flickering flame. You've shown that this hush is timeless. It lives in the walls we build around our own hearts, in the quiet rituals that help us sleep. A locked door, a light left on, a breath slowed to match the gentle rhythm of a watch that never truly ends. So, hold this hush close, carry it into your own nights, when the wind rattles your windows, when shadows gather in the corners of your thoughts. Remember, someone, somewhere, is always standing. Watch, in stories, in ruins, in the patient echo of your own heartbeat. May your dreams be warm, may your hush be deep, may the walls stand, and may you always know that, even now, the sleepy reality of the castle guard lives on, quietly guarding your dreams. Good night. Conclusion. So here, at the end of the watch, the story softens into its final hush. The castle stands, even if its walls are cracked and its stones carpeted with moss. The spear is gone to rust, the keys long lost to soil and time, but the echo remains. A quiet promise carried forward in every step, every whispered prayer, every tiny mark left behind by boots and hands, and the slow passing of patient hours. These watchmen were never the heroes sung by men. They did not charge into battle on polished horses or win grand victories with gleaming blades. Their victories were smaller, steadier. A locked gate at dusk, a lantern that stayed lit through a storm, a childish stream unbroken because danger never found its way past a simple man leaning on a spear. Now, when we wander through the ruins, we step into that hush. We feel it in the smooth hollows of worn steps, the cold draft drifting through arrow slits that once framed a guard's breath in the moonlight. We see it in the ivy that curls through forgotten corridors, where dogs once dozed by the guardroom fire and songs rose soft enough to drift into the stones themselves. Perhaps the truest part of this sleepy history is this. Peace is rarely won in grand moments, but kept in countless small ones. A latch tested twice, a lantern trimmed just right, a lucky token pressed in a pocket, a hand resting on an old door before stepping out into the dark. So tonight, as you let your eyes grow heavy, know that your own walls stand strong. The hush you feel is part of their watch. The ancient heartbeat of men who stood between darkness and the dreams of a village that trusted them completely. They guard you still, in every breath that slows, in every thought that drifts, in every quiet promise that says, "Sleep now. The gate is closed. The night is held. You are safe." And when dawn comes again, it will find you rested and warm, wrapped in a hush that never truly ends. A hush built by the sleepy reality of castle guards, echoing softly through centuries, from their watch to yours. Good night. May your dreams be gentle. May your hush be deep. May the walls stand